Good morning. I'm Patricia Harpring, Managing Editor of the Getty Vocabulary Program. Let me share my screen. There we go. This morning, I'm going to talk about equity and inclusion and the Getty vocabularies. I'll first go over the history and content of the vocabularies, and then a bit about the context in which equity and inclusion are important. And the main portion of the presentation will deal with an overview of selected issues, and I'll give you a little glimpse into some of our future projects. So as an overview, in a global environment where we strive to be more open and equitable while maintaining high standards for scholarship and research, the Getty vocabularies can be tools to facilitate such goals for art history and related disciplines. Long-standing goals of the Getty vocabularies are to make AAT, TGN, ULAN, CONA, and IA ever more multilingual, multicultural, and inclusive, focusing also on diversity, equity, unbiased and anti-racist terminology, and accessibility, but still remaining bound by our clearly defined scope and target audience. We can't do everything. This presentation lays out a selection of the issues surrounding the accomplishment of being more unbiased and inclusive. We don't yet have all the answers, so successful resolutions in this rapidly changing world will be ongoing, occurring over months and years, and in concert with the expert contributor and user communities. So first, let me give you some history about the content of the Getty vocabularies. To find out information about the vocabularies, go to any page on the Getty site, click on a search box, and look for vocabularies. Among the results will be this page. In the left-hand navigation, you can search the data, get access to the data releases, find out how to contribute, see our voluminous editorial guidelines and training materials and news. In the center, click on any of the headings to search the Getty vocabularies online. There'll be a search box like this where you can use Boolean operators, for example, scroll or papyri here, to get results. So first of all, what is our purpose and what are our releases for the Getty vocabularies? Well, as regarding purpose, for some users, the vocabularies promote consistency in the assignment of terms, or they provide the many options from which to choose terms for a concept. For others, they're used on the other end of the spectrum for retrieval and discovery of this information, to utilize the variant terms, the broader and narrower contexts, and rich contextual data to do retrieval. And for yet others, the vocabularies are lookup resources of information. Now, the vocabulary is released in various ways to accommodate these purposes. One way is in data files. We have linked open data, both the original format from several years ago and as well as a new format you might want to look at that's a little bit simplified and catering to the linked.art applications. We also have XML, relational tables, APIs. And these files are used by developers and they're incorporated by vendors in other tools. Also, these files can be transformed. For example, the Virtual International Authority file uses MARC that is obtained from one of these other files. So among these releases, you'll find simplified releases for developers who just want to link to the concept. But also, some of the releases have full, rich data sets that can be used for complex retrieval and discovery. Now, in addition to the files, we have an online search mechanism where, and this is consistently the top site visited at the Getty Research Institute every month. This is used by catalogers for copy and paste, and also it's used as a research tool. And here we present the full data in a logical display for end users. And this we consider another very important release of the vocabularies. Let's look a little bit at our history. This is the Art History Information Program, or AHIP as we were called. And the date I put on here is 1997 when the Getty Center opened, but it might be a little bit later because I don't see Joseph Bush in this crowd. And so it might be a little bit later. Anyway, I use this as a background to point out that the Getty was a trailblazer in committing resources to standards and vocabularies for art information beginning in the 1980s. And we were building on the work of others, such as Tau, the Thesaurus Artis Universalis in Europe. The Getty engaged disparate communities, visual resources, museums, libraries, special collections and archives, and some scholars, and under Getty leadership reached consensus on what should be best cataloging practice in categories for the description of works of art, and also how to create vocabularies. Here's a photograph taken just before the pandemic locked everyone down. It's the International Terminology Working Group meeting in early 2020 at the Getty. And this illustrates how over the years, the vocabularies have changed with the requirements of our core community and our need to remain relevant among the appearance of other resources. The Getty partners with international visual arts information communities who all have the same goals to make the vocabularies multilingual, multicultural, and inclusive. At the Getty, we have a very small editorial staff, and we work with a very small technical team and consultants such as OnToText. So we rely primarily on the contributor community for growth. And these are institutions and consortia for the most part, but also more and more scholarly projects and individual scholars. It's the 25th anniversary of the opening of the Getty Center, so we can do a 25-year comparison how we've changed over the years. There's been steady growth in the vocabularies, our reach is more and more global, our scope, our domain is more specifically defined, and with our growth limited or focusing on multicultural, non-Western terminology, etc. Our core audience has gone beyond the original visual resources, etc., to now include individual art historians, the conservation and archaeology community. Our number of partners has greatly enlarged from our original set of contributors, around 23 institutions, to now over 350. The data is now free and openly accessible through LOD and other formats under the Open Data Commons Attribution License. Developers have used the vocabularies in a number of ways, in search engines and collection management software, many other applications, but we haven't abandoned certain core values for giving credit and warrant for each of the terms and to provide access to those users who don't have access to funds and great technical support as well. We have done more and more outreach where we used to document for internal Getty use. Now we have hundreds of web pages for editorial guidelines. We participate in standards creation. We give workshops and create rules for cataloging art and vocabularies, and publish books such as Introduction to Controlled Vocabularies, Multilingual Equivalency Work, etc. On the right hand, you see illustrated at the top, the web page that end users use to access the data, and at the bottom, a JSON file. So this is how we release the vocabularies now. 25 years ago, they were in hard copy books and on CD-ROM. Now, I'm not going to go through all of these key characteristics, but let me just name a few. The vocabularies are standards compliant with the thesaurus standards from ISO and NISO. The vocabularies are authoritative. We cite authoritative sources and contributors, but not authoritarian. Users may use any of the variant terms they wish. We have the 3 thesaurial relationships in all of the vocabularies. And in fact, at this point, at least, all 5 vocabularies have the same core data model, which may change as we go forward in the future, but that's the way it is right now. Another point I want to make is we now can define how the vocabularies are unique among other resources. They're unique in their global coverage for their defined domain of the visual arts. They're unique in citing published sources and contributors, in allowing interconnections among historical and current information, and they're unique in accommodating the sometimes debated and ambiguous nature of our historical information. Also in allowing complex relationships within and between vocabularies. We now recognize that the vocabularies are not simple value vocabularies or authorities. They are rich knowledge bases in themselves, intended for research and discovery. Now let's look at the vocabulary, starting with the AAT, the Art and Architecture Thesaurus. It includes generic terms in several languages with relationships and other rich data. And terms that you might find there would be amphora, literati painters, Olmec culture, etc. And here I show you a record, more or less as it's displayed to our end users online in a logical way. And this we can begin to look at some of the unique features of the vocabularies that aid in facilitating inclusivity and multicultural content. So look at the IDs. We have an ID, a unique, consistent ID, persistent ID for the concept, the AAT ID. And then each term also has its own ID, so the user can link to any of those terms confidently. We have the languages and parts of speech indicated, English, plural noun, then we have the French, plural feminine noun, etc. We have dates associated with some of the terms. So the steel engravings has been used since 1792. We might have historical terms, engravings on steel as a historical term, for example, in this record. Also, preferences are marked, and that's very important. I'll bring that up again later so you know which is preferred, which is used most often in publications, and which is preferred for each language and each source, etc., by each contributor. So we have the terms in multiple languages, and also the scope notes might be translated in multiple languages. We have relationships and links, polyhierarchical links in the vocabularies, and these are very important for displaying different points of view. So for associative relationships, the relationships are defined. Here we have steel engravings as objects that are produced by the process of steel engraving. And another type of relationship, they're distinguished from siderographs, which are produced in a similar way. And this is just has one hierarchical view, but the hierarchy is polyhierarchical. So we could display steel engravings in a different view if that were necessary in this case. And then another important aspect of the vocabularies is we always note the contributors, not just for the record overall, but for each term. And that's true also of sources. They're found in published sources. There is warrant for each term in the record. And there are concordances between other resources that might have the same concept. Here for the Thesaurus of Graphic Materials at the Library of Congress is flagged for steel engravings. This is the way we display the hierarchy. Usually indention seems the best way to display these hierarchies, where the broader, narrower contexts, in this case, genus, species, are portrayed. They're so broad and deep that this seems the best way to display them, but you can try other ways if you're a developer. So here we have steel engravings, which are types of engravings, which are types of intaglio prints, which are types of visual works, etc. All the vocabularies have those characteristics, but let's see what the other vocabularies are. We have TGN, the Getty Thesaurus of Geographic Names, and this includes names, relationships, and other rich data for places. Our focus and development is on historical information for current cities, on historical nations, empires, archaeological sites, lost settlements, and physical features, but only as necessary for cataloging art. TGN is not comprehensive, and it's not GIS, that is a geographic information system, but it may include co-references to these other resources and to maps. So in TGN, you'll find terms such as Diospolis, the Ottoman Empire, Machu Picchu, etc. And here's a full record for the end user in TGN. You see again on the left the ID for the record. Each name has an ID, and there may be dates associated with it. Sene is a medieval name used during that period indicated. In the center column, we have relationships. In this case, the polyhierarchy is represented with Siena as part of modern Italy, and Siena as part of the ancient confederation of Etruria, and there may be dates associated with these relationships as well. There's an associative relationship. It was an ally of Pisa in the medieval period. On the right-hand side, you start to see how the vocabularies are linked to each other. These place types are linked to the AAT, inhabited place, city, archiepiscopal see, and there may be dates associated with them. latitude and longitude, notes, and at the bottom, the all-important contributors are cited for the record and for each term, and also the published sources and co-references. The US database, NGA, has a co-reference to that. We have a co-reference to the Library of Congress authorities, which have a record for Siena, to VIAF and others. ULAN, the Union List of Artist Names. This includes names, relationships, and other rich data for not just artists, but architects, firms, studios, repositories, some patrons, and other individuals and corporate bodies involved with the creation of art, both named and anonymous. So here you'll find records for Mark Rothko, the anonymous Crevelet master, the architectural firm I.M. Pei and Partners, and others. And here's what a full record might look like, where you have the ID for the record for Hokusai, in this case, as well as for each name of Hokusai. There might be dates for these names when the artists use these names. In the center, you have some biographical information, some dates, nationality, links to the AAT through the roles, printmaker, calligrapher, etc. In the right-hand side, we have places linked to TGN, associative relationships, and at the very bottom, an events there where he was active. And then at the very bottom, contributors to the record and the names, and as well as sources and co-references here to Library of Congress, record for Hokusai. The Getty Iconography Authority, IA, includes proper names, thesaurus relationships, and other rich data for iconographical narratives, religious or fictional characters, historical events, names of literary works perhaps, and others. So here you might find terms such as Yamonja, the African Yoruba deity, Xibalba, the Maya underworld, Shiva, etc. And here's a full record where you have the ID for the concept and for each name of Avalokiteshvara in this case. It has hierarchical relationships and links to the other vocabularies. So there's a link to the AAT as his role as Bodhisattva. We have associative relationships linked to Krishna, notes, and again, the contributors and the sources are very important. And co-references for Avalokiteshvara. There's a link back to the Library of Congress record for him. And if this entity also were represented in another iconography source, icon class, we certainly would have a link back to that. And finally, CONA, the Cultural Objects Name Authority. This includes titles and other rich data for works. And our focus on development, however, is on works that are not in repositories, although those definitely are within scope. So we're focusing on architecture, multiples, those are prints, for example, made from the same plate, works depicted in other works, lost works that may be documented, but we don't know where they are on planet Earth, destroyed works, works that are designed but not built, performance art. And here you might find terms such as Hagia Sophia, the Flatiron Building in New York, the Great Wave print by Hokusai. And here's an example of a full record. This is for the Temple of Heaven in Peking, Beijing. And we have a number of terms, and the record they have their IDs. In the center, you see how we have links to AAT and ULAN for the creators and the work types. And on the right, the locations linked to TGN and subject linked to the various vocabularies. At the bottom, we see the contributors for the terms and the record, and co-references in the sources, linked to the Built Work Registry, a link to Library of Congress, a link to UNESCO World Heritage. Those are co-references for this work and other resources. Now, let's start looking at the issues regarding diversity, multicultural views, etc. And look at the context. Well, first of all, we had to see where are we now to know where we need to go. So how do we measure how multicultural the vocabularies are? Well, first we could look at the languages in the AAT, for example, and the left-hand pie chart shows that big blue area. Those are terms in English. We also have pretty healthy chunks for Dutch and Spanish and Chinese and working on German and French and others, but we want to make more wedges more equally distributed. We could also look at the nationality and culture in ULAND, for example. And here on the right-hand side, that pie chart, that big yellowish orange wedge, those are European artists. So we know that the vocabularies now are pretty much Western-centric in some ways, so we are trying to improve this over time. And we have to know what is our target. We are comparing the vocabularies to similar resources and also to the status of scholarly literature to see where we need to improve. And we also have broader aspirational goals. So that's looking at the terms that exist now. We also look at the distribution of users. Now on the right, you see a map indicating in a typical month where the vocabularies are used in that online search mechanism. And they're all over the world, but the biggest dot is in the US, and the corresponding pie chart shows that half of our users are coming from the US now. So we want to improve that over time. Now we have to consider, how do we accomplish our goals for being more multilingual and anti-racist, etc. Do we play it safe and avoid controversial topics, or are we leaders? How do we avoid conflict between personal privacy and scholarly information? How do we provide accessible content for an inclusive audience in all realms? So these are questions that we need to work out, and that's what we're working on now. We look at the work of other groups. There are a number of groups working at the Getty. We have a DEAI inclusion plan. We have an anti-racist statement. We are developing content through an African American art history initiative, the Florentine Codex initiative, which has to do with pre-Columbian Mexico. And the GRI has acquired as co-custodian the archive of the Johnson Publishing Company, which focuses on publications of the Black community. So there are various ways, various groups at the Getty that we keep in touch with, as well as in related disciplines. The library community, visual resources, archives, museums, and universities all are publishing information and guidelines. We also look to government agencies such as the U.S. Department of the Interior, and publish scholarship in art history and related disciplines such as archaeology, anthropology, history. So this is something that's important. We tell our users that they must consider this when they use the vocabularies. The Getty vocabularies provide terminology in use by the community. They do not prescribe how to use the terms beyond the scope note suggestions. That is, the vocabularies do not prescribe, but instead assist in decision-making by providing rich contextual information. For example, we have rich preferences that inform users. What is the term used most commonly in authoritative scholarly publications? So that is flagged. We flag which is preferred for each language, which term is preferred in a record by each contributor, and which term is preferred by each published source. So this gives the user some context when they choose which term they want to use. And also we have additional flags that further classify terms. For example, we flag those deemed pejorative or objectionable. They're labeled avoid use for new indexing. We also flag those that are preferred by a particular culture, perhaps. Historical, obsolete, and even objectionable terms are not deleted in the vocabularies since they provide access for research and discovery, but they are so flagged. Also, our users need to keep in mind that we in the Getty Vocabulary Program are not numerous enough, representative enough, or expert enough to ourselves make weighty decisions regarding which terms are best for each of the millions of vocabulary records. But instead, the users can look to their professional organizations for guidelines on usage for unbiased, anti-racist, and correct post-colonial terminology, etc. And then, through contributions to the vocabularies, this expert user community may actuate change in the vocabularies by contributing. They could form consortia to reach consensus and contribute to the vocabularies. They could survey professional organizations already making these decisions and then contribute back to the vocabularies. Now let's look at some of the selected issues. Well, this is a slide that illustrates even further how the vocabularies are already positioned quite well to facilitate different points of view. We have all of these links between the different vocabularies, so different hierarchical views, different language displays, and different views may be accommodated. We also have other characteristics in place, such as these flags. Here's an example for historical usage where there's a term, these vessels are called libites now, and past the scholars called these type of vessels denoi, and now that term's used for something else. So the term denoi is flagged, avoid use. Well, we can use this same facility to express ambiguous and different points of view regarding inclusivity and unbiased terminology. And here's an example of that. Illegal aliens was formerly preferred, and now it's been deprecated. It's considered pejorative and is so flagged. And undocumented immigrants is a preferred term for this concept. This is another example of the same term in the Library of Congress. So this is an authoritative source for us, and it provides warrant for our change in the AAT. But this also points out how the Getty vocabularies differ from a lot of other resources, such as Library of Congress here. Note that all of these 450 fields for the term that is now non-citizens are not really synonyms of illegal aliens. We have enemy aliens, foreign population, resident aliens. These are not all the same. They do not mean exactly the same thing. And this is because the purposes between Library of Congress and AAT differ. Library of Congress is grouping headings that may be used to index similar topics in books or whatever. But AAT is grouping synonyms for disambiguation and precision. So for us, the preferred term for illegal aliens is undocumented immigrant, which has the same meaning. But for those other terms in that record for the Library of Congress, we may include those in separate records, non-citizens, expatriates in the AAT, and they may be linked. Here's another example pointing out how users and vocabulary developers need to be aware of and be willing to make changes when the preferred terms change. Here's a term, slaves was formerly the preferred term. It's now noted as avoid use. It's considered pejorative, and instead enslaved people is preferred. And the reason is that formulated in this way, the term separates the person's identity from their circumstance. And this type of changes are made regularly. The AAT data is refreshed every month. Here's an example in Library of Congress, that same concept. They are going to initiate enslaved persons as the preferred term and deprecate slaves. And this has taken a while, a few years. They discussed it and made a recommendation, and now it will take place. And so sometimes there are complaints that these changes don't happen fast enough. However, we have to consider the other point of view. When dealing with authorities like this, making precipitous changes in an evolving environment will disrupt the consistency and reliability for the users. So this is the issue we need to consider. Here's a way we need to allow the expression of ambiguity or uncertainty, and the vocabularies are well set up for that. So unlike standard scientific classifications, which must be precise, the Getty vocabularies realize that sometimes the cataloger doesn't know the precise, for example, a material in this case. So the AAT includes terms that allow for the implying of ambiguity and uncertainty. So here's an example, granite, which in a scientific classification would be categorized by geological origin, igneous, sedimentary, and metamorphic. And indeed, in the AAT, this appears as an igneous rock. But other terms appear in the AAT in the same hierarchy. So here's a term from the Maori culture in New Zealand, ponamu, and they do not classify by geological origin, but instead they classify by the appearance, color, markings, translucency. And this term can live perfectly well, happily, with the other igneous rocks, etc., in the AAT. We allow this ambiguity to exist. We respect diverse points of view for Indigenous peoples, for example, and we can use the polyhierarchy, associative relationship, qualifiers and names on relationships to show how over time and territory these cultures have changed. So for example, the Cherokee people were forcibly removed from the southeastern United States to the south central US state of Oklahoma at a certain point, and we could represent that through the hierarchical position and dates. We know that these terms for the Native American cultures are out of date in the AAT, and we hope to remedy that over time, and hoping that the the contributor community can help us with that. Maybe repositories such as museums could convene with experts and members of the community to reach consensus and contribute this knowledge to the vocabularies. Sometimes the issue is explained in the scope note that can help the users make a decision. Here in the term, the record is for Native American, and the note reads, wherever possible, use the specific tribal name. But if you have to use the general term, Native American is widely used in the United States, but many groups now prefer American Indian or Indigenous American. And if you're in Canada, First Nations might be more appropriate. So the user then can decide which one they wish to use. Here's another way we respect diverse points of view by not forcing terms into an existing record with an English preferred term. Here is a term that is a Nahuatl term, and in Spanish and English publications, it's used as a loan term. It's not really translated as a preferred term in publications, although we do include a literal translation here as well if you want to use that, but it's not flagged as preferred. Here's another example respecting diverse points of view. We had the term Anasazi, which was used for many decades to refer to this pre-Columbian Southwestern North American culture. But now that is considered pejorative, it's a void use. And instead, the preferred term is ancestral Puebloan. It's preferred by the Native Americans, who are the descendants of these people. And also this coincides with the preponderance of usage in modern scholarly literature. We have terms that can document the colonial diaspora and various cultural points of view in the AAT. And here's another example, colonial African. We know that this is a rather sparse part of the hierarchy, and we would welcome contributions to increase coverage. Still on the AAT, we want to include terms for gender identity and preferences. And this is a part of the hierarchy we've worked on recently for gender identity, where we have gender non-binary illustrated here. In TGN now, we can be sensitive to historical points of view. So here we have terms, there are 600 some terms that in the US that have had their place names changed. They used to have the word squaw in the name, and that is a derogatory term referring to a Native American female. So here in this case, Squaw Creek Spring is now a pejorative term, and Alder Spring is the preferred current term. So we try to keep up to date with that. Here's another example in Australia, and in common usage, in most common usage in literature, the English term Burrup Peninsula is used, but we do include the Australian Aboriginal term Murujuga, so you could pick out that term if you wanted to because of the flags and preferences marked. Here's a way in which the hierarchy can help us be sensitive to biased current or historical points of view. We can represent overlapping jurisdictions between the Indian nations and in the United States. So here we have the Navajo Nation, and Blue Gap is a place in the Navajo Nation. But the hierarchy it's a polyhierarchy. So you can see Blue Gap exists in the state of Arizona in the United States, as well as it's part of the Navajo Nation. You can use the polyhierarchy for that. In Kona here, we also want to be sensitive to historical points of view and decide which name should be flagged as preferred. Of course, you can use any one that you want. They're flagged by language and sources, etc. So do we list them chronologically with the most recent first or by language? We are using the term Hagia Sophia, which is used most often in scholarly literature, but the other information there is there if you want to choose a different term. And also it's true for the place types of this building. It was originally a church, then a mosque, then a museum. It's a church again. It's worked by form, is basilical. And we have dates and other flags to help you choose which term you would like to use. In the iconography authority, there are events, and here the migration and colonial memory and post-colonial memory can be represented and flagged, which name should be preferred. Of course, you can use any name. And here we would try to remember that history is written by the former colonizers, and that's different from the memory of the formerly colonized. Here again, also in the iconography authority, where we're dealing with deities and religious topics, etc., we want to respectfully describe and classify these iconographical topics. Here we have some Nahawa deities illustrated, and we involve the scholarly experts and or members of the community referenced, if possible, in making these decisions. And here's a fuller record for one of the Nahawa deities, and you can see the rich full record linked to the consort, the deity from AAT, etc. Now we're over in Yulan. We can acknowledge various cultural traditions, such as names and naming traditions, for example, in Yulan. Here we have Sori. It's a name for the printmaker Hokusai. It's one of his art names that he used early in his career. So this can be flagged as such. And we can also use the same set of flags to, for example, flag an adult name that was conferred at adulthood by a certain culture. We could indicate a changed name, for example, if it's a transgender artist who changed their name. Here still with Hokusai, we want to respect personal privacy, but we know we have to balance this with the critical ability to do research. So could including names, roles, location, sex, gender be considered an invasion of the person's privacy? Here's Hokusai's record, it's gender noted and who his adopted parents were. It becomes a little bit trickier when you're dealing with more, recent or living people, as with this artist. So for us, this is an open issue. When it is established in reliable published sources that the person so self-identifies, at this point, we are including it. We know that privacy is paramount, but to eliminate knowledge is to deny research. For example, scholars want to search female artists. They want to search African American artists. And in fact, an artist's oeuvre may be influenced by or publicly focused on their own gender identity or sexual preference. So if we do not include this data, how can it be researched? Here we have a case of an artist who was born Anna Prinner, and they're transgender, later changed their name to Anton Prinner, and this is well documented, and the person's so self-identified, so it is included. But this differs from other resources. For example, Library of Congress recently changed their rules to do not include the gender of a person in the authority, excuse me. That's because their primary goal of their authority data is only for disambiguation of the name, not for the contextual biographical information. So that's different from the Getty vocabularies. We are not simple, ours is not simple value vocabularies, but instead include rich contextual information to allow research and discovery. I just showed this. We have great documentation or extensive documentation for our best practice online if you want to see that. And finally, the final issue is about accessibility and inclusivity. So this has to do with physical spaces and web design. For the vocabularies, that would include web design, but we also expand it to include various other slices of the audience, so that, for example, regardless of money or advanced technology or culture or language, or even the intention of why you're using the vocabularies, we want to make sure that the vocabularies are accessible. Now let's use the last 5 minutes just to look a little bit into the future. Well, we're in the process of reimagining how to make the AAT, TGN, ULAN, KONA, and IA ever more multilingual, multicultural, inclusive, focusing also on diversity, equity, unbiased and anti-racist terminology, and accessibility. So we're working with our traditional partners and looking also for a broader audience or a broader set of contributors to work on these projects. You might want to look at our linked open data page and see the new linked.art semantic representation. We're working, as I said, with contributors. So the contributors benefit by having their data incorporated into the greater whole of the vocabularies, and they're sharing their knowledge. They can contribute by spreadsheet, XML format, and online form. Who are the contributors? There are various Getty projects, such as the Provenance Index, special collections, but also national documentation agencies and consortia, such as the RKD or Academia Sinica in Taiwan, image collections, such as the Frick Reference Library, Indiana University Digital Collections. And these are projects that are departments that are already collecting this authority data as they do their work. But also there are some projects that are making translations, for example, specifically for contribution to the Getty vocabularies. And that includes translations in Spanish and Dutch, Chinese, German, French, Croatian, Portuguese, Japanese, maybe Turkish. Art repositories such as the Pinacoteca in Sao Paulo, the Rijksmuseum contribute. Publishers sometimes, such as Grove Art Online. Research projects such as the Florentine Codex Initiative or the Traditional Chinese Architecture Initiative at Vanderbilt in China, as well as individual scholars contribute. You might want to look at our download center to see new and different varieties of our releases and LOD, XML, relational tables, APIs. Also, we have this Open Refine reconciliation service that you might want to look at. Open Refine is an open source tool for data cleanup and transformation. And through the reconciliation service, you could bring, for example, your artists in a spreadsheet into this service and make a link to the ULAN record for it. We are doing a survey of users to see who and how the vocabularies are used and how users would like to use them as we go forward. We have a Sparkle endpoint that you can use to get whole data sets or individual records, but we're doing a demonstration project because here also you can ask 90-some interesting queries of the vocabularies. So we want to use this rich data of the Getty vocabularies to answer complex research questions on some of our databases at the Research Institute, maybe the Provenance Index and the Getty portal. So we can ask a question like, in ULAN, what are all of the non-Italian artists who worked in Italy during a certain period of time? And you could change the parameters there for the criteria to ask different questions along the same lines if you wanted to. So we can use this rich data, formulate the Sparkle query, search the vocabulary database, and then get the results of the query. And in our case, we would just probably grab those IDs for ULAN and search in the Provenance database and the Getty portal, where hopefully the artists were already reconciled to ULAN, so you could find the IDs, get the results of the queries, and display these results. So this is a project we're working on now. But in general, overall, we want to do linking with to the Getty vocabularies, linking out into the world and have others link to us. So this is our improving interconnectivity is one of our big goals for the future. Okay, my time is up. Thank you very much.